Recently, I finally got the time to dive into more puppet combo games. I previously did a video explaining the story behind their 2020 title Murder House, and that was a while ago now. So in this video, we'll be looking at a game that is somewhat linked to Murder House, and that is Stay Out of the House. Puppet Combo is a game studio that makes and develops games that draw their inspiration from 80s VHS era horror slasher movies. They are unique in their execution, and the games definitely have a certain charm. Stay Out of the House did have a prologue that came out titled Night Shift, so we'll look at that first as it leads straight into the main game. Now, even though this isn't exactly new, there will be spoilers in this video for Stay Out of the House. There will also be minor spoilers in this video for multiple other Puppet Combo games such as Murder House, Feed Me Billy, The Glass Staircase, and Nun Massacre. But before we jump in, a quick message from the sponsor of this video, Atlas VPN. 'Tis the season to be jolly as Christmas is here, and Atlas VPN are offering an 85% off 3-year deal plus 6 months extra for only $1.70 per month. With over 750 servers around the world, connection to Atlas VPN servers is incredibly stable and lightning fast. Now this means that if you're a gamer playing online competitively or just for fun and need a reliable connection, then this is ideal for you. As well as that benefit, you'll also be safe from being DDoSed and also from things such as avoiding a lobby full of bots. Of course, it's not just used for gaming. As a massive sports fan myself, living in the UK, I find it extremely difficult to watch any US sports, so I just hop onto Atlas VPN, fire up whatever US-based streaming service I use, and I can watch anything: basketball, baseball, and American football. This is also really good for using in conjunction with Netflix, where you can turn on your VPN and use it to access Netflix servers around the world. Different servers, of course, mean different options. You can use it on multiple devices, and Atlas VPN can also block any malicious links, ads, and trackers, and it also notifies you if and when someone is trying to steal your data. So make sure you take up this amazing 3-year VPN plan for $1.70 per month. Remember, you also get those 6 months extra too, and that works out at 86% off. You also have a 30-day money-back guarantee as well. Be quick and get your deal by clicking the link in the description box below or looking for the pinned link in the comment section. With all that being said, let's get into the video. It's 1986 and Deborah Kopiski, a cashier at a remote gas station, arrives for her night shift after being dropped off by her friend Amber. She enters the gas station and takes over from the previous cashier, Katz, who is off on a date. Deborah gets to work on completing jobs left for her by her manager, Rick. It's a quiet night, but later in her shift, after serving a few customers, Deborah begins to sense something isn't right. She notices a white van mysteriously circling the gas station, slowing down, almost as if the driver is scouting out the place. The van leaves and another customer walks in, a very strange man. He asks Deborah if she is alone on her shift. He acts very shifty, looking around the store and looking at Deborah. He buys a beer and just leaves. Deborah then notices the back door to the store has been left open, and after, when she is investigating it, she discovers that the previously locked restroom has now been unlocked. Deborah heads back into the store and gets knocked out by a large man with a burlap sack over his head. Driving through the remote countryside of rural Oklahoma, Brendan, traveling with his girlfriend Roxanne, leaves Roxanne in the car and goes to use a restroom at a roadside pit stop. Roxanne is sleeping but wakes shortly afterwards to find that Brendan has not returned. Checking the bathrooms, her fear is compounded when she finds Brendan's driver's license lying on the ground at the rear of the restrooms. Heading down a long pathway to investigate, Roxanne discovers some old warehouses with a notice which reads that the Crawford Mill had to be shut down at some point. It was due to a lack of business and the fact that the owner of the mill had been diagnosed with a stomach cancer, thought to be a result of radiation poisoning. Moving further down the path, Roxanne befriends a stray dog. She eventually comes to a cornfield. On one side is an abandoned church, and on the other side, an old house which, on the side, reads Nuclear Fallout Shelter. The dog growls at something inside the house, and then darts inside. So Roxanne heads inside and helps the dog in the basement. She searches for signs of Brendan, but her search is interrupted by what appears to be a deceased old woman in a wheelchair. Roxanne is grabbed by a masked man, and she is knocked out. Roxanne then wakes up a few hours later locked in a cage. A sermon plays on the TV and the preacher's words seem to cause her great pain. She also complains of stomach pain, but despite this pain, Roxanne manages to pull on a loose piece of wire from the cage and frees herself. Careful not to make any noise, Roxanne finds various items that she needs in order to make her escape. She finds a lighter, which is very helpful in this dark house. The drawers around the top floor have many useful items, which include paper clips, bandages, and bullets. Roxanne finds a newspaper clipping which sheds more light on the person who attacked and abducted her. He is known locally as the Night Shift Abductor, or the Butcher. He has been doing this for a long time. The article lists a total of 6 known kidnappings. She eventually finds a screwdriver and uses the vents, and she discovers a safe spot complete with a handy survival guide. But Roxanne can't just hang around there forever, so she heads back into the vents and hears a chopping sound. To her horror, the abductor is chopping up human remains. Dropping down, she has to be super careful because as well as the butcher in the kitchen, the old woman in the wheelchair is also watching TV in the living room. Roxanne suffers more headaches and stomach pains. She finds a hammer and uses the hammer to open up a boarded door. Inside the room, she discovers the body of a previous victim. This victim had a revolver but had been trapped in that room by the butcher. He mentions that the butcher was keeping a number of people outside in cages and was killing them. The man charged the butcher and got away. However, in his escape, the man had been hit with a hammer and was bleeding badly. He speaks of the butcher's almost superhuman strength. He went into the ventilation shaft but noticed that the butcher doesn't seem very smart. That's when the man found the gun. He tried to shoot the lockout on the front door, but it didn't work. He tried to shoot the butcher, but found that the bullets didn't do much to him, so he escaped back into the vents. The butcher then tried to draw him out of the vents with mustard gas. He lists a bunch of useful items that he found in the house, but the man was eventually forced into the room he ended up in, and the butcher waited until the victim ran out of bullets and nailed the door shut from the outside. He tried to escape through a hatch, but the hatch was nailed shut. The man eventually died. Grabbing the revolver and using the man's list as advice, Roxanne finds drain cleaner and using it on the sink in the upstairs bathroom, she's able to obtain a hex key which lets her pick locks, giving her access to useful items. Roxanne then finds rubbing alcohol, puts it on some rope, lights it, and grabs the wire cutters inside the cupboard. Using the wire cutters allows Roxanne to use the vents to pass through to another section of the house. She spots Brendan. He is tied to a chair but is killed by the chainsaw-wielding butcher. Roxanne suffers more headaches, but she eventually finds a van, and in the back, after smashing the windows, she finds a large plank of wood. Overloading a scale with, well, human meat, Roxanne obtains a gear for a clock, and setting a time on the clock, she uncovers a secret doorway. It leads upstairs to yet another section of the house, the attic. Using the long plank of wood and looking in one of the rooms, Roxanne discovers a knife. She also finds a mound of human bones. She discovers a key along with the vent which leads outside. There's no clear escape route from the yard, but Roxanne sees the cages that the deceased man's note was talking about. Inside, more victims. 5 of them. Roxanne manages to unlock all 5 cages. She gets 4 victims to safety, but the 5th one is crippled and unable to move. Unfortunately, Roxanne's decision to leave her there and get help upon escaping is a fatal one, as this victim is killed. Nonetheless, Roxanne manages to lead the 4 surviving victims to the safe room. She learns a lot more about what's going on. A survivor, Kyle, mentions that the butcher is apparently hiding the key for the front door somewhere in the kitchen. Kyle also mentions that they think the butcher is a cultist of some sort, and that's why they think he's got the sermons playing all over the house. That it's his job to cultivate human flesh, and that is why he's kidnapping and sacrificing people. Another survivor, Evelyn, says that the butcher has been slaughtering them one by one, like farm animals. She mentions that she heard about corridors tucked away in the basement. Evelyn says that it could be a way to escape. She says that Roxanne needs to find a way to power a yellow door in the basement, and that the code has something to do with the clocks. Then Roxanne speaks to another survivor. It's Deborah. She talks about how she was abducted. The 4th and final survivor, Hank, speaks about the cult that Kyle was referring to. He says the place they are in is called Mill Creek, and it's effectively a ghost town. That people driving through the town on the highway just go missing, and they find their cars in the swamp with no signs of anyone anywhere. Hank then mentions rumours of a government testing facility somewhere in the town. Back out in the yard, Roxanne uses the shed key and finds a roll of duct tape and a valve wheel. These 2 items essentially determine how the game will end. If Roxanne goes to the attic again, she can use the duct tape on a broken piece of wiring, and she obtains a battery that falls off the ceiling fan. She obtains 2 more batteries, and she uses the batteries on a can opener. She opens up a can containing the house key, and she informs the survivors in the safe room that she'll try to escape and send help. She then uses the key to escape. Outside, she is chased by the butcher, who is wielding a chainsaw. She makes it to a trailer park and to someone's door. A man opens it. It's the strange guy from Deborah's night shift. He invites her inside, but she experiences more stomach pains and starts vomiting blood. Something erupts from her mouth, flinging itself at the stranger, and that is the escape ending. So what on earth is happening? Well, we'll shortly find out as we uncover the other endings. If, on the other hand, Roxanne is caught by the butcher, she ends up in a different room with everything she collected having been taken from her. She spots a strange thing in the vents staring at her. After escaping, if being caught again, Roxanne is this time tied to a stretcher, and if she is caught again, she comes to being wheeled down a corridor by the butcher. The word sacrifice appears on the screen and it fades to black, followed by Roxanne screaming. This end for Roxanne can also be brought about should she watch the sermon for too long whilst inside the cage. If, instead of using the duct tape, Roxanne uses the valve wheel to shut off the steam in the vents, the now open passageway leads to a breaker room connected to the basement. Selecting the correct voltage fuses and resetting the breakers will restore power to the yellow door. Using the clocks as a reference, she discovers the code for the door and enters. True to what Evelyn said, there are indeed corridors in the basement. If, whilst in the bunker, Roxanne finds a long corridor, then she will come to a door shrouded in red light. If she tries to enter said door, the butcher will knock her out. She comes to and finds herself restrained and tied up in a room which is covered in blood. The butcher is standing next to an entity which at first glance appears to be a very much alive mass of flesh. Something comes out of the creature and seems to examine Roxanne before eating her alive. Moving throughout the bunker, avoiding the butcher who is down there getting rid of human remains, Roxanne finds a dying man. He tells her that she must stop the demon downstairs, and this is a facility the man describes as an evil place. He says that she needs to shut down the nuclear reactor and it will destroy the entire facility. While searching for a way to shut down the reactor, Roxanne finds that animals have been feeding on the remains of the butcher's victims. She manages to drain the flooded lower levels and finds a research facility. The letters CFV appear to be on the walls of the facility, and notes that the facility's staff, its scientists, had for decades been experimenting with the effects of radiation. Whilst avoiding the patrolling butcher, Roxanne manages to find 2 shutdown keys and inputs the codes. This overloads the reactor. Heading for the exit, however, Roxanne finds the door is blocked by falling debris. She attempts to move the debris, but it's made a challenge by the fact that the chainsaw-wielding butcher is trying to stop her. She manages to remove the debris whilst avoiding the butcher and runs down a tunnel. Roxanne later wakes up in a hospital. A nurse and the doctor stand over her, asking her how she's feeling, but they eventually leave after telling her she will be well again in a week. She passes out. She comes to and the TV is on, she starts vomiting blood, and a worm-like entity flies out of her mouth. She passes out again, and when she comes to, everything has changed. The hospital is shrouded in red light, and in the other rooms she discovers pulsating sacs, presumed to be eggs, all over the place. She walks outside into the red light, and the game then ends. And that's it for the plot, but there's much more to it, so let's dive in. At some point, Roxanne finds a note from another victim. It mentions a room near the basement. The note mentions a handheld radar being inside, but entering a number of notes inside the room give us an idea of who the butcher is. We know already that he lived in this derelict, rundown and uninhabited part of the Oklahoma countryside. The elderly woman in the wheelchair, also in the house, was thought to have been his mother, given that if Roxanne kills the woman, then the butcher goes absolutely mental and enters into a frenzied state. From the notes inside the room, we can see that he was a Christian and a churchgoer. The butcher grew tired of waiting for his answers from God, tired of waiting for rewards. He came into contact with a religious cult. They'd grown in influence in the local area, and due to their extreme doctrine, it forced people away from the area, including the local church and its minister. In his notes, the butcher speaks of new routines, and he speaks of offerings and bodies being plentiful. In another note, he speaks of it helping him see and feel, that it is showing him truth, and that the more flesh he brings it, the more it shows him. He calls what he's doing a divine task, and that whatever he is feeding can lead them all closer to divine salvation. The butcher used to use homeless people and vagrants as a sacrifice, but he found that he needed people with more to lose, more fear and distress, and that is when he started to stalk people working night shifts. He'd keep them for days, letting their distress grow, and then he'd kill them, and then feed their remains to the creature in the bunker. Alright, so CFV stands for Church of the Father's Vision. They are an esoteric cult that worship otherworldly godlike creatures, eldritch abominations. They rely on both animal and human sacrifices in order to appease their gods. Now, in order to look at the potential origins of the CFV, we need to look at some previous games in the Puppet Combo archive, and this is where the spoilers will be, so you have been warned. This section is also mostly speculation, as nothing has been confirmed yet. In the game The Glass Staircase, a Dr. Edward Sullivan returned home from World War I as a medic and was suffering from PTSD. Prior to the war, he was a successful doctor and owned a wealthy estate and married his love, Juliet. However, everything was about to get so much worse for Dr. Sullivan as he started to see visions and have dreams of an eldritch god through a fever he described as the heat. Becoming obsessed with the heat and discovering its origins, Dr. Sullivan converted the basement of his manor house into a laboratory, and he spent days down there. Guided by the visions he was experiencing, he managed to build a large machine. Eventually, this heat would begin to affect people all over the world until one day, a group of zealots affected by this heat turned up at Dr. Sullivan's manor wanting to speak with him. The zealots stood out there for days. Anyway, the zealots are eventually allowed in and supply Dr. Sullivan a steady supply of test subjects for his experiments, and the doctor even used his own servant girls as subjects. They had to take their pills, and they could eventually return home to their families if they were good and completed their chores. The cultists then began to see Sullivan as a prophet of sorts. Sullivan would eventually start to show signs of mutation due to his machine. The purpose of the test subjects was to provide a suitable vessel for their god to possess, and the machine would make that a possibility. One day, the zealots let slip to Dr. Sullivan that their grand plan was to bring about the apocalypse by feeding every human on Earth to the machine. Dr. Sullivan manages to shut the machine down, but it's too late for him, and he continues to mutate. One of the servant girls, Margaret, manages to destroy the machine for good by overloading it, killing the mutant Dr. Sullivan, and she escapes the manor being picked up by a man in a black suit. Now, I believe this is linked to other Puppet Combo games, which we'll explore in the next section of this video. In terms of stay out of the house, I believe that the radiation the researchers were working on to be the same thing as the heat from the glass staircase. They tried to work out what effects radiation had on humans, but they began to test the effects on animals instead: monkeys, rabbits, cows and pigs. They then built a machine. The bunker's lead scientist, Dr. Tamba, mentioned that the audio waves from the machine that they were subjecting the animals to had very little effect on monkeys, but that by using VHS tapes as a method of exposure, they saw interesting results after 60 days of exposure. Not only that, but after 60 days of exposure, it appeared that a sort of hive mind had been created. Humans were then introduced into this research and were placed into cells where the VHS tapes would play over and over again. The subjects became very aggressive. The thing is that the effects from the VHS tapes were affecting the researchers too. 1 year into their experiment on humans in 1981, a researcher had had enough and destroyed a vital piece of equipment. Over the next 5 years, the bunker would become abandoned. The CFV would be founded, and their front was that they were a religious movement when their actual goals were far more sinister than that. In line with the goals of the zealots, their goal was to bring about the apocalypse. At some point, the fleshy creature manifested in the bunker, and this could essentially be the machine, just alive instead. As previously mentioned, the CFV then drove out the nearby church and most of the town's residents. The pastor of the local church communicated with his congregation, proclaiming that this cult that have appeared are not teaching biblical truths. They warned the pastor of the church by shooting through the window of his church and just missing his head. He then left. The CFV, or rather its leader, would then create sermons using the VHS tapes, along with the hum from the machine, which would be a form of brainwashing. These tapes were then sent to the butcher and another protagonist from another game, Billy from Feed Me Billy, in which Billy is mentally manifesting an entity in his closet called the Hole. Billy was sent a package by the CFV containing a VHS tape, a gun, and a mask, and would go out killing people and feed them to the hole. Other possible subjects are Mother Apollonia, the nun from Nun Massacre, and the Easter Ripper from Murder House, as in both games you can find CFV boxes, implying that they too were sent VHS tapes by the cult. It could be that the Butcher was one of the test subjects from the experiments and eventually decided to live in the house on top of the bunker. Maybe he went mad as a result of being in close proximity to the creature. Who knows? Oh, and there's the baby. That weird, horrible, biting vent baby. It has its own room in the house, but I'm not sure how to explain where this demon baby came from or why it's there. But that is it for this video. I guess we'll have to wait for more puppet combo games, which will hopefully start to elaborate a bit more on the Church of the Father's vision. If you enjoyed this video, then please remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, but for now, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.